like to head into our final session and our closing keynote speaker. I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Kirchhoff, who's a senior fellow at Schmidt Futures. Dr. Kirchhoff began his career on staff of the Space Shuttle Columbia accident investigation. After helping analyze the breakdown of safety culture inside NASA, he went on to write the U.S. government history Hard Lessons to Iraq Reconstruction Experience, coined the Iraq Pentagon Papers by the New York Times. During the Obama administration, he served as an aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a senior advisor to the presidential counselor, John Podesta, and as director of strategic planning for the National Security Council. He led teams working on issues ranging from how technology will change the future of security to design of Operation United Assistance, which deployed 3,000 U.S. service members to end the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. Chris, we're very excited to have you join us today. Please, I see you've shared your slides. I'll let you take it away from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually today. And I'm, of course, doubly virtual since I'm staring at my own slides. So it looks like I'm speaking into space. I actually am. It's an honor in particular to be with this crowd, a crowd of medical professionals and first responders. I'm also a doctor, although I learned very early that I'm the kind of doctor that's not very helpful in those situations, and that I'm a political scientist by training. And I was a very proud young political scientist, and I began putting doctor when I made airline reservations on my ticket. And one flight attendant came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Sir, there's a medical emergency. Can you help?" And I very quickly learned where I stood in the hierarchy of doctors that can help. So thanks so much for having me today. What I thought I would do is spend maybe 10 or 12 minutes just going through a few slides that will tell the story of the United States and the global response to Ebola. And in particular, tell that story in a way that highlights some of the lessons that I think are particularly relevant now to how we hope to recover from COVID. So for me, the story starts in 2012 when, as a young Pentagon official, I became an aide to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a four-star Army general named Marty Dempsey, the head of the U.S. military. And while working for General Dempsey, you never know, of course, what's going to happen in the world. And of course, one of the things that started to happen in the very end of 2013 was an outbreak of Ebola further west in Africa than it had been seen before. It started here in the village of Olandu in Guinea with a 2-year-old boy named Emile. This is Emile's father. Emile played below this tree, which bats would roost in, and fell ill with a high fever and passed away, as did his sister, as did his mother, as did his grandmother. 2 relatives of his grandmother who attended the funeral from other villages also later fell ill. And from there, the chains of Ebola spread into Conakry, the capital of Guinea, and to the 2 other West African states affected, Sierra Leone and Liberia. And this is where I get involved in this story. I happened to have no background whatsoever in epidemiology or medicine, but I did my master's thesis on African sleeping sickness. And so on General Dempsey's staff, that made me a person who got thrown at the question of what should we do if Ebola becomes much worse than it was at the time. So starting in the early summer of 2014, with a team of people in the Pentagon, as Ebola was rolling into the capital cities of those 3 African nations and causing such harm to health, it looked like we had an epidemic that was really running away from us. And in this early phase of the epidemic, I want to note so many of the heroes who stepped up with so little preparation. I got to meet one of them. This is Dr. Jerry Brown, the head physician at ELWA, an NGO in Monrovia. The chapel that you see on the right of the screen became the first Ebola treatment unit in Monrovia. It was put together literally looking up instructions on the internet for how to safely don and doff PPE to treat patients. And it was heroes like this who in the very beginning were left alone to face an epidemic that by the midsummer of 2014 was very clearly spiraling out of control. In fact, by August, it became clear that absent international intervention, you could imagine over 1 million cases of Ebola in West Africa and potentially Ebola spreading beyond the African continent. So at this point in time, national security decision makers, both in the White House, and of course led by President Obama, decided that international response was absolutely necessary to try and staunch the dramatic acceleration of caseloads. And as we all know from watching the movies, when there's an emergency involving an outbreak, extremely attractive epidemiologists materialize into the field. However, this turns out to be only true in Hollywood, because we learned in August of 2014 that the entire global deployable capability of people that were trained to treat Ebola were 300 volunteers organized by Médecins Sans Frontières. There was essentially no standing capacity either in the United States or in the global system to respond to an emergency of this sort. So we had to, at that point, make up a plan. And that plan became what the military called Operation United Assistance. In very rapid order, the US military deployed 3,000 US troops to West Africa, who in time supported over 100,000 first responders and medical professionals who, over the next 14 months, worked very hard to trace out every chain of transmission. It's important to note that at this early stage of responding to the Ebola outbreak, our theory at the time was that the most important thing to do was to increase bed capacity, treatment capacity, so that those who were sick with Ebola could be safely treated and isolated. And that was the prevailing view of how to most quickly break the chains of transmission. And interestingly, that turned out to be wrong. The bulk of the resources of the response went to constructing ETUs. And by the time most of those ETUs were ready for service within a few months, community transmission had dramatically decreased, and it decreased mainly because people had changed their behaviors. There was incredible public awareness campaigns about how to protect yourself from Ebola and how to get someone help if you think they might have it. And it was ultimately NPIs or behavior change that broke the back of the Ebola outbreak. When it became clear that we had turned the corner on Ebola, it was also clear to all of us that had worked on Ebola that the systems we had both in the US and internationally had almost collapsed under the weight of this comparatively modest outbreak, where approximately 28,000 people were sickened and 11,000 died. So right away, we began in the National Security Council an exercise of looking at what lessons we learned, what went well in the response, what was unexpected, and what needs to be strengthened going forward. And I was privileged to lead that study for the National Security Council under the leadership of Ambassador Susan Rice, the National Security Advisor, and Ron Klein, the Ebola czar. And that study was very extensive. It involved about 70 people from across the government, from 26 different agencies. We wrote ultimately a report that the New York Times made public this March that you can go read, that made a series of very specific recommendations of how the US government and the international system could itself be better prepared the next time. It was a privilege myself to learn much more about what you do in your life. I got a chance to spend time in West Africa at the tail end of the response and actually go out with contact tracers in one of the last active chains in Guinea. So what did we learn? Well, the first thing that we learned, of course, is what we now know so well, is that the world is evolving in all the kinds of ways that make zoonotic outbreaks more common than less common. We're deforesting the planet, we're bunching ecosystems together that increase the interaction of human and host species. It's not surprising to learn that in the last 50 years, we've seen a fourfold increase of zoonotic transmission. And our best estimates are that at least 1.69 million viruses are out there running around in the animal world that at any point could potentially jump the species barrier. So this is clearly a very, very serious problem for international health. And we ended with 4 recommendations from the Ebola Lessons Learned report. The first was just the recognition that Ebola as a virus is comparatively hard to catch, comparatively easy to test for. Of course, it's not transmissible by air. And we got doubly lucky because Ebola broke out in a region of the world that had minimal air connectivity and actually land connectivity to other major population centers. And we knew that the next time this happened, luck in that way would probably not prevail. The other thing that we learned, in addition, of course, to the need to dramatically increase capacity at the US and the international system, is that the crisis really is the opportunity, in the sense that the Ebola outbreak catalyzed incredible action in Congress. In December of 2014, the US Congress passed a major infusion of funds, an Ebola supplemental, that provided billions of dollars to strengthen pandemic preparedness systems, including the $1 billion that the Obama administration channeled into something called the Global Health Security Agenda, which strengthens the systems in other countries abroad. It also provided funds to strengthen the way we communicate with the public, because as we've learned, NPIs are incredibly important, as you know, much better than I do. So why don't I stop there? And then I'd love to answer any questions that you might have and talk more about how we can learn from Ebola in the context of COVID.
Thank you, Chris. Happy to, again, remind the audience, if you have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat box. There are a couple questions that I'd like to start with. Based on what you've seen with Ebola, and you wrote a very interesting article in Foreign Affairs titled "Ebola Should Have Immunized the United States to Coronavirus." Can you touch a little bit more in terms of what some of the learnings that can apply or perhaps doesn't apply to COVID?
Yeah, well, I'd say, one of the learnings is that certainly, many people in public policy, particularly those who work in the role of national security, when they think about protecting the citizens of the nation, their nation or other people around the world, they tend to think in terms of very traditional threats, when in fact, as we know, as Bill Gates has trumpeted in TED Talk after TED Talk, that pathogens can be one of the most severe threats to our health. And so I think Ebola revealed to me and to many people in the Department of Defense in the United States, particularly those who deployed on Operation United Assistance, the severe security threat that, in fact, pathogens can present. And after Ebola, there was a lot of, I think, deep thinking in certain parts of the US government about how to, again, establish new capacities to better meet that threat. But we clearly didn't go far enough. And that showed because not only were the systems when COVID came to the US not strong enough, but they also, of course, weren't operated very well in the first instance.
Yeah, so in the US, obviously, we are transitioning to a new administration. What advice would you give to your new administration?
Well, I'm first of all incredibly proud to have worked with some of the most talented people I've ever met in the last administration, the Obama administration, and a number of those colleagues are going to likely be taken at posts in this. Some have already been named to the task force, the COVID task force that President-elect Biden named on Monday, and I have incredible confidence in their own ability to bring the best judgment to bear. But let's not mistake the size of the challenge. However, the size of the challenge, I think, presents an incredible opportunity, because I think the American public now understands better than it did after Ebola, even though, of course, Ebola became a huge domestic issue for us as we had active cases here in the United States that spawned a great deal of fear and even, some would say, hysteria. I think there's going to be an incredible opportunity, much as there was in the United States after 9/11, to rethink what the institutions of government do and to notice where there are profound gaps in capacity, and then to go in and change the mission and the budget and the culture of agencies to better be able to deliver the capacity that they need to protect Americans in the way that we all know they need to be better protected.
Great. Being in Silicon Valley, and I think some of the DNA of Schmidt Futures is very heavily influenced by technology. This is a pretty broad question, but what do you see the role of technology then in preparing for this pandemic and future ones?
Yeah, well, I should say, first of all, just a bit about my current work. I currently work at a new philanthropy called Schmidt Futures, a philanthropy founded by Eric and Wendy Schmidt, the former CEO of Google. And we're proud to have, in a small way, contributed to the COVID response by very quickly getting out the door in the first 6 weeks of the outbreak here in the United States, over 100 grants that supported incredibly innovative work, including at Stanford, with Manu Prakash's work on frugal innovation, as well as Susan Athey's work, incredibly important work on advanced market commitments for vaccines. We're also doing some very important work on COVID strategy and policy. And of course, one of the key variables we've learned in COVID is it's not just about the medical response or a nation executing a pandemic preparedness plan. It's very much also about trust and political culture and conversations between leaders and the people that they lead. And so to study the critical variable of trust and how that has so profoundly affected how different nations that, by many measures are similar, have had such dramatically different outcomes with COVID. Schmidt Futures, along with the National Science Foundation and other funders, have underwritten a 23-nation comparative study of COVID response that involves about 59 international researchers with country examples from 6 continents. And we're very proud to be debuting these studies in a forum we're going to host on January 11th and 12th of next year. So for those that want to learn more, mark your calendars and visit schmidtfeatures.com, and you can soon find more information about how to sign up for that conference. So we're very focused on not only what role technology can play in responding to outbreaks, but also understanding the key political variables that drove both beneficial and problematic outcomes in COVID, and what that means for our playbook for future pandemics.
Great. And kind of extend further on the technology, one aspect of it is detection. What is your kind of perspective in terms of the infrastructure for us to be able to detect early, these type of threats in the future?
Well, we've all, of course, seen, not only here in the US, but in so many countries around the world, including Israel, how quickly, even when we think we have COVID under control, it can sort of sneak away from us and spike in ways that are so harmful to people and families and communities and businesses. And so testing is, of course, so crucial. And that's, of course, one area where the United States failed spectacularly in the early days of this outbreak. I think, what's interesting about testing now is just the possibilities that are inherent in new low-cost ways to rapidly test. This is an area where new biology, I think, is going to have its day in the sun. And my profound hope is that governments around the world, particularly the governments of the G20, will really make a collective investment in bringing to scale the incredibly important innovations that are popping all over the place, with multiple different kinds of not only testing, but also multiple different kinds of surveillance, disease surveillance, to understand exactly what's circulating out in the world. So that we have a much better situational awareness of not only what's infecting people, but what's going on even beyond humans in the animal kingdom.
You're in an interesting position to be able to see a lot of threats, and having the experience with Ebola, and just thinking ahead. What keeps you up at night? What worries you when you think about the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, people would often ask, Chris, you work in national security, what keeps you up at night? And certainly after Ebola, my answer was pandemics. Pandemics keep me up at night. And, Ebola had a case fatality rate, 250 times COVID. So I don't think any of us should be under any illusion that although COVID has, of course, brought such profound disruption around the world, it could have also been catastrophically worse in a number of important respects. And so what I worry about most is that we won't seize the next 12 months in the way that we need to really build the systems that can scale in the way we might someday need them. Ebola, was, of course, a traumatic experience here in the US, in other countries that had cases, and certainly a tremendously traumatic experience for those 3 countries in West Africa. And yet, despite that, we so quickly moved on to other things, and quickly, I think, lost sight of what we had learned. And my hope is that, frankly, the disruption caused by COVID will create a different kind of political moment, a different kind of window of opportunity that leaders around the world will walk through and seize, including, in particular, the Biden team, which, of course, was the team that had to manage Ebola.
Great. In the final few minutes, wanted to see if there's anything else you wanted to share.
Just an honor to be here. I had a chance to look over the agenda of your conference, and it's heartening to know the seriousness with which you're considering what might happen if COVID intensifies, how to take the steps to be ready, how to deal with multiple emergencies at once. This is the kind of thing that makes me, as somebody who might someday need to seek healthcare, feel so much more comfortable. So I really applaud the work that you're doing. I applaud the fact that you have this collaboration internationally and wish everyone all the best of luck in their incredibly important work. And I also urge all of you too to recognize that we're entering a moment where people really are going to be looking to their medical professionals to tell them what to do when a vaccine comes, and also you're going to be incredibly important voices in this political debate that we have about how to build back better, both here locally at hospitals and internationally. And so please make sure to raise your voices. This is a situation that for sure is going to take a village to get right and to be ready in a much better way the next time the world faces something as catastrophic as COVID.
Thank you, Chris. That was very well said. We appreciate you joining us for this symposium, and please continue to tackle the tough problems through your work at Schmidt Futures.